Hello, my name is Atticus Godfrey Hamilton, and I'm here to explain a project that I'm embarking upon called 60 in 60 by 60. So, what that is, there are 60 books I would like to read before I turn 60 years old, which happens to be 60 months from now. So, I've divided up my project into five dozens. So today I'll talk about the first dozen books that I intend to read, about one every month. And I've begun them with the ones that are set the farthest back in the past. So, for example, the first book is The Adventures of Robin Hood by Gilbert Henry, also known as Henry Gilbert, depending on if you're going with his first name or his last name to begin with, and on and on. So I've read The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle. Now I want to read this classic by Henry Gilbert. I'm about 100 pages in, and so far it is really interesting, and it's an excellent adventure with all the characters that you're familiar with. The next book is set in the year 1300, and this is a Shakespeare play, All's Well That Ends Well. I've read all of Shakespeare's plays except for three, and I wanted to read this one last because of the title, All's Well That Ends Well. There's a uh, poeticism to that, if you will. But in order to read these in the order that they are set chronologically, I'm going to read All's Well That Ends Well before the last two, which you will learn about shortly. After All's Well That Ends Well, we have Kristin Lavransdatter, which is set in, I think, 1322 to begin with. This is a trilogy. You can see that it's a large book, right? And the first one is The Wreath. The second one is, I think, The Wife. These are translations from a Norwegian. And the third one is The Cross, which to me sounds like it's going to end tragically with someone dying, maybe being crucified. But I don't know because I haven't read this yet. It's written by Sigrid Undset, and she was, I believe, born in Denmark, but she grew up and lived in Norway, except for when she escaped Nazi occupation for a little while during World War II. She's a beautiful woman. When I've seen a portrait or a photograph of her, and it's kind of surprising. I didn't know they had women like that in the 1920s when this was written, and it did win the Nobel Prize. And I haven't read a lot of Nobel Prize winning literature. But, here's another Shakespeare. This copy is No Fear Shakespeare, which is convenient because it has a modern translation on one page, right, and then the actual text on the other. Um, mhm, mhm. So measure for measure. And then after that, I'll only have one Shakespeare play remaining. But before that, I will be reading Romola by George Eliot. Now, George Eliot wrote a couple of novels that I have read, and they're considered giants in literature. One is Middlemarch, probably her most famous, and the other that I have read is Silas Marner. Um, and I enjoyed that one. It's a little shorter than some of her other novels. But the three that I have remaining to read are Romola and then Daniel Deronda. But in between Romola and Daniel Deronda is another one in this stack that you're going to see shortly. This copy has notes inserted. These were inserted by my mother when she read this book, and this was her copy. Now she's passed away now. So one nice thing about reading a book that you get from a loved one that has departed is you feel a little bit closer to them while you're reading it. Here is the final Shakespeare play at last, and it is called As You Like It. And once I've finished that, then my challenge that was posed to me by a friend in college in the late 1990s will finally have been met. And then I will walk a little taller and brag a little more because I will have read all of Shakespeare's plays, plus one called Edward or King Edward or something like that, which I thought was a Shakespeare play, but evidently there's some dubiosity to the authorship of King Edward. Actually, there's dubiosity to all of Shakespeare's plays because there's a conspiracy theory that they were really written by, well, there's different theories, but Edward de Vere is one that comes up often. And I don't believe in any conspiracy theories myself. I don't subscribe to any of them, but if I did, I would go along with this theory that maybe Edward de Vere is the real author of Shakespeare's plays based on Shakespeare's lack of education. But we won't get into that, will we? Because we have to move on to the next book. This is the Scarlet Pimpernel. Well, we're all the way up to the 1700s now. This is when there was the terror going on in France and in Paris. And this fellow, the Scarlet Pimpernel, he's kind of like the Batman of the 1700s. He uses disguises and his cunning to help people that are being persecuted during the terror. And he has a persona which like is like Bruce Wayne, right? Where he's just a dandy, I guess, is what maybe you would call it. And he goes to parties and he talks about this Scarlet Pimpernel. He comes up with this poem that he tells people. He says he does it very dandy-ish. He's like, is he in heaven? Is he in hell? Damn that Scarlet Pimpernel. I know this part, even though I haven't read the book because of the movies and the made-for-TV events. So there's not Scarlet, what's her name? Jane Seymour. She does one in the 80s, and then before that, there's like a black and white version of the Scarlet Pimpernel. They're both good, very entertaining. They hold up well over time, but now I'm going to finally read the book, which I understand is the first in a series, and it's a good series, but I haven't read any of it yet. This brings us to the other George Eliot novel that I foretold, The Mill on the Floss. This is set in, I think, 1831, something like that. And it's in England, and I get the feeling this is like factory work story, but I don't know. Here it is. Now this one is called The Confessions of Nat Turner. Now this is set around the same time as The Mill on the Floss, but this is not England. This is the United States in the South, where slavery is rampant. So Nat Turner is a historical figure, but this is a novel. But it's about the slave rebellion led by Nat Turner, and so it's going to be told from his perspective, story. And evidently, that slave rebellion put the fear of God into slave holders. And that is precisely where the fear of God ought to have been all along. So I've read books by Emily Bronte, The Wuthering Heights, which is great. I've read Jane Eyre by the sister Charlotte Bronte, but just recently I started reading The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. To me, she's the least well-known of the three sisters, but her writing I find more entertaining so far. And so once I get past all these others in the project, I'll be reading Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. This will be the second of her novels that I shall have read. Those are the two that are most well known of Anne Bronte's, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall and Agnes Grey. Then it's Wilkie Collins. This is Moonstone. Now, I've read The Woman in White not long ago, and I was impressed with how Wilkie Collins could develop the suspense and create tension. Now, The Woman in White did eventually begin to drag, and it went on, and I was ready for it to be wrapped up. But I did come away from it being quite impressed. And so I'm looking forward to The Moonstone. It will be my second Wilkie Collins read. And then finally, this is the 12th one. in the first leg of the 60 in 60 by 60 project. This is a Pulitzer Prize winner written about 20 something years ago, and it is called The Known World by Edward Jones. It's set in the 1840s. And, or I think maybe part of it is in the 1850s, and then they go back to the 1840s when the story began, and maybe they go back and forth. I don't know, I haven't read it yet, but it looks like a good one. I just read a little bit from the inside flap where it says, Henry Townsend, a black farmer, bootmaker, and former slave, has a fondness for Paradise Lost. Well, I also have a fondness for Paradise Lost. When I studied it in school, the professor, Edward, I can't remember his first name, but Professor Durham, Dr. Durham, he would bring his copy of Milton's writings into the classroom, and he would set that down on the lectern in front of it, and it would open up like an old worn Bible, and I was so impressed because I was like, he must know that book by memory, however many 800 or 1200 1800 pages were in that book. Senorita, thanks for joining us. Well, that's all for today. If you have any comments, that would be wonderful. If you were to leave your comments, and then on my next video presentation, I could respond to your comments within reason, so long as they aren't too abusive. That's it then. Thank you.